Today on the Worldview Bros, what is political philosophy? Well, it's political and it's philosophical, but it's most definitely not political science. Are you intrigued? Well, you should be, because this is pretty cool stuff. Anyway, we'll discuss this question on this deep dive edition of the Worldview Bros. Hey everyone, welcome to the Worldview Bros. My counterpart isn't here to give me all my names. I guess I'm Jim, and my brother Sal is not with us today. I think he's getting a mani-pedi maybe, or something along those lines. I don't know. He's a very vain guy. I don't know what to tell you, but he's not here. He left me here, and that's better because we get to discuss this really cool question together. Before we get started, make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So I want to jump right into this. What is political philosophy? And why do I raise the question? This is actually what I studied in college. I studied political philosophy, not political science. You can imagine I probably deal with this question a lot. Is there a difference between them? And there is. So I guess a good starting point is how it is that there is a distinction, or why is this field called political philosophy, and why do some universities teach it? Most of them don't. This is kind of a niche thing, I suppose. Let me put it this way. I'll be blunt. Political science, in my opinion, and the opinion of my tradition, if you will, my scholarly tradition on this point, is that political science is not the way to do it. The way to do it is political philosophy. And I'm going to try to explain why, see if I can get some agreement on this. So a very important figure in this question is a very important thinker of the 20th century. Can I start with this story? Let me start with this story. When I was in college, I remember going to a talk. You know how it is, though, different professors will have a certain talk that they might advertise, and you might go to it. So on an evening, there are some very curious and interesting posters that said the most important thinker of the 20th century. Now, you guys know, of course, that we just recently said that, in my opinion at least, that the greatest writer of the 20th century was J.R.R. Tolkien. And I also think, for instance, that C.S. Lewis is in the conversation for greatest thinker of the 20th century. Well, another candidate is this person, and that is Leo Strauss. So, as a matter of fact, I have here Leo Strauss, one of Leo Strauss's books, and it's called What is Political Philosophy? Another good book from him would be Natural Right and History. I think this is the first one I read because that's what's recommended as the first thing to read for him. So anyway, who is Leo Strauss and why is he important? Leo Strauss's main contention is that political philosophy is what had been done for a very long time. and that political philosophy has been lost with the philosophy of modernity and then postmodernity. Philosophy is the most comprehensive of the disciplines, and we talk about it here all the time, that philosophy is the pursuit of knowing the whole of everything as much as it's humanly possible, okay? To the extent that it's humanly possible to know the entirety of everything, okay? To know all the things, that's the scope of philosophy, all right? And below philosophy, if we look at categories, there are two very important categories. And this is, again, from the Greek tradition, from ancient Greece. You have philosophy. Below, you have these two categories: natural philosophy and political philosophy. So natural philosophy is what we would typically call science, okay? Natural philosophy is the pursuit of knowing the truth about things that are visible or touchable, okay? Things that pertain to the physical senses, right? So you can call it physical philosophy if you like, okay? But this other subcategory then is political philosophy. And this has to do with the question of how it is that we're supposed to live here and now. Or you might say, another way to put it, it's the philosophy that deals with human nature, because understanding human nature and our place in the world is what ultimately dictates how we're supposed to live. Okay, so we're not doing that right now, is the point, and that's exactly the contention that Leo Strauss would make, that we're not looking at political things in the context of truth. That the modern contention is that political things really fall just under convention. And the point is, we'll always have opinions about what it means for political action to be better or worse. Whether something is worth preserving or worth changing, we tend to have opinions about this, right? And what is an opinion? An opinion is something that we actually don't really question at the moment, right? It's what shall we say? It's a principle of action, right? An opinion is a principle of action. I do something because I have an opinion about this, right? But we still recognize that our opinions are at least changeable, right? Think of things where you know for sure that you will not change this. That's when you have obtained knowledge, right? To go very objective on this one, like you can't really change my opinion about 2 + 2 = 4, right? That really is knowledge. I mean, you can try to cook something up, and I'm just going to look at you like you're kind of crazy, and, oh, that's cute how you can make, 2 + 2 = 5 by some kind of a trick or something like that. The point is, I know this to be true, right? And we know what that feels like, if you will, like when you actually gain knowledge of something and you feel comfortable with it. That's the goal of political philosophy. The goal of political philosophy is to change all of our political opinions into actual political knowledge, right? And I mean, again, think about it. I brought up the example of equality and freedom. And I mean, make an introspection, guys. Like, do you feel 100% confident about what freedom is and what equality is? Because I know that there is a cloud of uncertainty around these terms right now. Okay, we're actually gonna delve into those two particular topics in the next few shows. Like, we're going to do a show just on equality. What in the world do we mean by it, right? I mean, I can tell you right now, like, I don't consider myself equal to Lionel Messi. I mean, we probably have about the same height. I think I have to look it up, and we both have like amazing good looks, but we're not equal, right? When it comes to soccer, for instance, or when it comes to skill, fame, or we're not equal in many regards, right? So what is this equality? What are we talking about? Okay. What I would suggest is that we're in a position in history right now where we all have opinions about this, but I'm not sure that we have a lot of knowledge about it. Same thing with freedom, okay? And any important political precept that you hold, is it an opinion or do you have knowledge, right? So political philosophy is this attempt, this way of life of devoting yourself to trying to get knowledge of it, right? Insofar as it's possible. And you know what? What Strauss says about this and what Plato and Aristotle would say about this as well is that even if we ultimately don't obtain knowledge about something, it's better to understand our ignorance about that principle, and it's better to understand the underlying questions about this principle than to have a false idea of knowledge about that principle. Okay, so this is the whole saying of Socrates, right? That what does Socrates go around saying? That I'm only special because I know that I don't know anything, right? And he says that tongue in cheek to the people that he converses with. He actually does know some stuff, right? But that's his point. Like in some cases, his starting point is, well, you know what? I need to know that I don't know something before I can actually start knowing it. And the point is, guys, we walk around in life and we just see a bunch of people who think that they know stuff. And, maybe in some cases they do, but there's way too much of this arrogance that goes on in everyday life. People, we're too confident sometimes in our opinions. And again, this is not a nothing's true kind of moment. You guys know that I don't believe that. The point is, the philosophic life is one of a heavy dose of skepticism. Not an ultimate skepticism, but a healthy skepticism. I guess another important thing that's worth mentioning about political philosophy, especially as to how it compares with philosophy, is that it is trying to just answer the question how we're supposed to live. This is the most immediate question that we can ask ourselves. How are we supposed to live, right? I mean, if you just ask philosophy is extremely demanding. It's trying to figure out the truth about everything. So, how are we supposed to live if we probably don't know the truth about everything? In fact, we probably don't know the ultimate truth about really anything. We probably come close to knowing full truth about certain things. Even in science, do we know what gravity is? Well, I mean, kind of. We know a little bit about it. Can we say that we know it ultimately? No. Anyway, my point is, how do we live if we don't ultimately know the truth about things? I mean, if we're going to live, aren't we supposed to do it the right way? Figure out what is the right way to live, what is true and what is not true? Well, political philosophy is trying to find the best way for us to live. And along the way, we can, even if we don't find ultimate truth, we definitely find kind of a pathway. I mean, we can understand, we do know that certain things are right or wrong, even if we don't know fundamentally or in the best sense why something is right or wrong, right? I have another physics analogy for this, and that would precisely be gravity, right? We can know a little bit about gravity, like with Isaac Newton's law of gravity. And if you know that much, dang, I mean, you've got plenty, and you can plan a mission to Mars simply with Newton's laws of motion. All right, is it the full truth? Actually, no. It turns out with Einstein, we figure out gravity in a little bit deeper way. We understand a little bit better. Can we understand it better and better? Probably. It may well be the case, and I actually do believe this, that we can we're probably doomed to never understand gravity exactly as it is. I think there's ultimately a human limit to that, okay? But that doesn't mean that you can't know it. Maybe you can understand the outline a little bit, and we live that way, right? We just don't know the full measure of it, right? So political philosophy is very aware of this. And so political philosophy is the branch of philosophy that doesn't deal with the physical senses. It has to do with metaphysical realities, especially as they pertain to human nature. Okay? So as we had discussed before, we know that human nature has a lot to do with our ability to separate the is and the ought, right? With our ability to think about questions of justice, advantage, beauty, and goodness. So political philosophy then is going to be tied to these ideas. Now, political science, on the other hand, really wants nothing to do with all of those metaphysical questions. And this will be immediately apparent to all of us. This is kind of the way that we, frankly, are brought up in school and everywhere else. I know that because that's how I felt when I was young. I was really taught by the world that in order to figure out the truth about anything, there's only one way, and that is science. Okay? And as much as I love science, I do believe in this ancient way to categorize knowledge: philosophy, natural philosophy, and political philosophy. It makes sense to me. Okay? And as a matter of fact, there's also another category, and that would be a category of truth that human beings simply would not have access to. The whole point about philosophy is, what is it within the scope of a human being to figure out with reason, okay? And again, reason, what we are able to figure out with reason isn't limited to the physical senses, but there's also the perception of the true, the good, and the beautiful. Okay, and interspersed with that are also questions about justice and, of course, how we're supposed to relate to other human beings. Okay? So political science is not going to make use of these categories. It's going to ignore them. Doesn't really believe that they should apply. And this doesn't this is the same whether we're talking the modern influence or the postmodern influence. Again, the postmoderns are going to be skeptical of any kind of science anyway. But the point is, to the extent that they will tolerate it, they sure would, I guess, use a scientific method to figure out political things. But what does that mean? I mean, in political science, there is going to be a lot of data collection. There are going to be a lot of graphs, right? It's the collection and analysis of politically relevant data, which actually on its own is fine. The point is, what then do you do with this data? Political science on its own can't decide for you what you're going to do with it. Like, should we have this policy or this policy? Because it's not within its realm to consider if a certain course of action is good or bad. I guess I should back up a little bit. Leo Strauss explains this a little bit. Well, not a little bit, but a lot and very well in his book, again, What is Political Philosophy? Leo Strauss explains that one of the key things that political science brings to the party here is the distinction between facts and values. So this is a very modern and postmodern idea that facts and values can be completely separated, and where value judgments are really off the table of discussion. Like, you can't ultimately debate value judgments. They're just going to be what they are, right? And so the idea is that we can do that we can have a correct methodology of figuring out political things and to even have decision making on political things just based on facts and not value judgments. Okay, so this would be very strange to the ancient Greeks. Like, it really wouldn't make sense to them, and I think ultimately it just doesn't make sense. There's a critical flaw to this. So let me give you an example of this. Consider a study that is made about inequality. All right, so we've heard a lot of studies where there might be a report that women in a particular workplace are only making 80 cents on the dollar in this workplace, or in a state, or in the country at large, or something like that. And so you collect the data, and that's what's laid out. Now, why was this study made in the first place, right? Why was this study made in the first place if political science is supposed to stay away from value judgments and is just going to stick to facts? Well, how can you figure out what a politically relevant fact is if you haven't made a deeper analysis beforehand about how it is that we're supposed to live? So there's certain key political ideas that we take for granted that we value. So presumably the political scientist says, well, in our society, we value equality, we value freedom. Why? Well, I don't know. Those are value judgments, and those are a little bit off the table of discussion. We're not going to argue that. We're not going to look at that. Okay. And by the way, I am in favor of equality and freedom. But then again, when I say that, what does that even mean? Which is part of the problem. I'll get to that. But the point is, why did they decide to make the study in the first place? And then what are we supposed to do with it? Well, again, we're simply going on the assumption that we value equality, and so therefore we collect this data and then we do something about it. All right? So political science, though, had no say in what value judgment we're supposed to like, or like, why do we even like that particular value judgment? So this is where political philosophy would come in. Political philosophy comes in to ask why it is that we value something political, like equality or freedom. Even more basic, what is the purpose of a polis, a city? What is the purpose of a political community, whether it's a city or a state or a country or whatever, right? What is its goal? What is its end? What are we supposed to do? And how do we figure out if we're doing a good job or a bad job? So the point that I'm trying to the point that I'm trying to make with this example is precisely the criticism that Leo Strauss makes of political science. That by adhering to this distinction of facts and values, and by saying that, oh, we're just going to focus on the facts, it sounds really good. It sounds like, oh, they're super objective, so they're going to figure it out. But the reality is, you've just completely bypassed a very important question. So it's the contrary. Actually, political science is the more lazy way of doing politics. Political philosophy will look at data and try to figure out what we're supposed to do with it. But because it first asks the question of how it is that we're supposed to live and what it is that we value and why we value it. Okay. Let's put it this. Leo Strauss makes an excellent example of this. A good way to understand what political philosophy is all about is to think about the difference between what it means to be a good citizen and a good man, okay, or a good person. So think about it. What does it mean to be a good citizen? Well, think about what it would mean to be a good citizen in Hitler's Germany, right? What does it mean to be a good citizen in Hitler's Germany? Well, a good citizen in Hitler's Germany would be a bad citizen in any other kind of regime, right? Think about that, right? Because almost any other regime would be better than Hitler's Germany. And that's another thing. Like, how can we even say that one regime would be better than another? Is it possible for us to figure that out? Well, that's the question that political philosophy raises. Are we capable of figuring out if one regime is better than another? Okay? I mean, again, going back to Hitler's Germany, let's say you have a good citizen. Let's say you also have a good man. Is there a good possibility that the good citizen in Hitler's Germany also is a good man? No, that would be impossible, right? So the good man is not the same as a good citizen in a particular regime. Now, it's obvious in the example of Hitler's Germany. What about in another kind of a regime? Is the good citizen of a particular regime the same thing as a good man? Would it be possible for a good man to be a good citizen? That's the question that Leo Strauss raises. I want you guys to think about that one. Can a good man also be a good citizen? So what Leo Strauss says about this, what the ancient Greeks would say about this, is that would only be true in one regime, and that would be the best regime. The goal of political philosophy is actually simply that. The goal of political philosophy, as a almost perhaps unattainable goal, is to figure out what is the best regime. That's what this book is about, actually. Plato's Republic. Notice that it's simply called The Republic of Plato, aka that could also be called the regime, the political association, the Republic. Meaning what? It's called the Republic because it's about trying to figure out the Republic, the par excellence Republic, the best regime. That is what political philosophy is about. So I think that's a very useful way to think about it. Who is the good man? Who is the good citizen? And if you can find the regime in which the good man is the good citizen, then you've solved all political problems of history. In the Republic, very famously, they start off by asking each other what is justice, and whether justice is something that's worthwhile, whether it's advantageous, and what it even is. And so in the discussion that they have, very famously, Thrasymachus is of the opinion that justice is simply whatever the person in charge says it is. So Thrasymachus says that justice is simply the interest of the stronger, and it's essentially the stronger having his way. In particular, then the ruling class. Whatever the ruling class says is justice, well, that's what justice is. That's really what our modern idea of political science is, in fact. That whatever is just is whatever the people would hold to be just. Or, maybe we're not talking about a democratic regime. Maybe it's a tyrannical regime. Now, we're all human beings, and we can't really live. We can't really look at it that way consistently, right? So if you actually press a political scientist into making a decision whether the United States is better than North Korea, for example, I suppose they would hesitatingly say that, oh no, certainly the United States is better. I mean, after all, we perhaps imperfectly adhere to democracy and equality and freedom. And I think, again, I laugh a little bit because I think one of the problems is that we don't really analyze these things very deeply, and they're kind of just ideas that we inherit and just don't question, But if we press them to really prove it, they might say, well, ultimately I can't justify why the United States is a better regime than North Korea. I guess this is just our preference, and we think that it works out better, but yeah, I can't really judge whether one regime would be better than another. And if you think I'm unfair about that, I wish it were the case that the majority of political scientists would be adamant about certain regimes being better than others. But in my experience studying and looking into this, a rationale is really not given for one regime being better than another. And again, that's this adherence then to keeping value judgments outside of it, because we're applying the scientific method to political things, right? So obviously with political philosophy then, on the contrary, we're supposed to use the distinctions of good and bad and better and worse and just and unjust and advantageous and disadvantageous. And that it is in fact possible for human beings to know something about this. If you think about it, every political action is really ultimately going to confront us with the idea of the good. A political action is going to do what? A political action is meant for either preserving something or for changing something. Think about it. Every political action is either because we're trying to preserve something or it's because we're trying to change something. And this is Strauss's argument, right? So if you're trying to change something, why are you trying to change it? Well, because you're trying to make it better. Or if you're trying to preserve something, why do you do that? Well, because you think it's worth preserving. So you can't escape. This sounds like I'm crazy, right? But the point is that you can't escape the question of good when you deal with political matters. So, and I think one reason why Thrasymachus holds the view that he has, that justice is simply the advantage of the stronger, I think the rationale is the same as what we would have today, what skepticism would kind of show us today, is that when we look at different regimes and we notice that there are differences, we notice that there are differences in value judgment, there are differences in what people hold to be just or unjust. Though, by the way, that's a little bit overblown. There's actually a lot of agreement on what we hold to be just. But anyway, to the extent that we see differences, we tend to think, oh, well, because it's just conventional, right? I think we had this discussion before, right? But we see that it's simply whatever the societies decide, and it seems to be not natural at all, but just conventional. So therefore that means that there is no correct regime, or there is no correct understanding of justice. There is no ultimate understanding of justice, or something like that. Now, the philosopher would not look at it that way. The philosopher would really criticize us, you or me, if we make that argument that, oh, we see variation, I see all these different regimes, therefore nothing's true. The philosopher would say that you're giving up on truth too easily. Come on. Some people will see variation and say, oh, nothing's true. But the philosopher would see variation and say, oh, I wonder which one's right, or I wonder which one's closest to the natural way of doing things. It's very important that in philosophy, one of the key things that we would focus on is figuring out the nature of things, right? Like, what is the nature of a human being? What's the nature of whatever, of a horse, or whatever it is, or what is the nature of political things? What is the nature of physical things, and so on and so forth. I should probably explain a little bit why this fascination with the Greeks. Why do I talk about Plato and Aristotle practically every time? And that is in fact because of the influence of Leo Strauss and the way that I was taught political philosophy at school. So anyway, with the Greeks, Strauss says that really political philosophy starts with them, which is very bold. I get it, Not that political thought of any kind didn't exist previously. Of course it did, says Strauss. But this actual idea, this goal, right, this project of trying to figure out the best of regimes is special to this age, and philosophy generally, the life of philosophy is special with these guys. One reason he says that this was able to happen is because of the incredible political turmoil in which they lived. It was kind of a, what shall we say? It's like a crossroad, or it's like where rivers meet, and you get this chaos, and this is an opportunity where new ideas can develop. So, Plato and Aristotle lived in the time of the Peloponnesian War. You have like a convergence of different kinds of regimes duking it out. Like you have the democratic Athens battling the oligarchical Sparta, and the regime's really changing after the fact. There's a lot of political turmoil. And sometimes this produces good fruit. It's like they say, it's really when you're in a war that the character of people comes out. Sometimes like the hidden talent of people will come out. And there's no question that Plato and Aristotle had this genius moment where they're also kind of looking around them and trying to figure out these things. It's a special time in history. Okay, it's time for Stuff I Like, actually, today. We're going to do that. We're actually not going to leave the theme entirely. There's going to be a connection here, but what I want to talk to you about is the best superhero movie, actually. So I think I may have mentioned before, but like the godfather of superhero movies is, well, the Dark Knight trilogy, but the Dark Knight in particular. I absolutely love this movie. And one reason I love it is because it has a lot of political philosophy, actually. And I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but we definitely see an example of it. So you probably know, like, especially at the end of the movie, there's this very interesting ending, right? Like the way that Batman takes the blame for the deaths that Two-Face commits. So there's actually a connection between that and the Republic of Plato. And the connection is this idea of the noble lie, okay? And this is definitely one of the more controversial parts to political philosophy or the Republic. I ultimately, this is a tricky thing to get. Well, let me get into it. In Book 3 of the Republic, when Socrates is talking with his friends about justice, they figure that to try to grasp what justice really is that they have to create this imaginary city, okay? And so they start creating it. They say that they're going to need like the warrior class, and they're going to need all these different elements in order for the city to work. But the problem is that it is, in fact, very difficult to maintain a political regime, okay? Like, what does it take? Well, it does take a class of warriors. Why? Well, because even if you start getting the regime to get better and better and better, like we were talking about what the statesman is trying to do to get it better and better, well, you will have barbarians at the doors looking at your very beautiful city with its libraries, right, where people are studying up virtue and all these things, right? You have great agriculture and you have all these riches. Well, of course, the barbarians are coming in and they're going to try to take it away. A regime will always need to defend itself. And so there's always this very delicate balance between improving a regime and maintaining a regime. And sometimes what is necessary, that is to say, sometimes they go against each other. That the more you try to improve the regime, the more you leave it open to predation. The more you weaken it in its ability to maintain itself. It's the whole divide about liberal and conservative, the change versus the conserving part. It's difficult to have both of those elements just kind of in perfect fluctuation. They tend to clash a bit. So anyway, one thing then that is necessary for the city is for the city to defend itself. But how in the world do you persuade citizens to defend the city, right? It's one of the trickiest things about politics, right? How do we have soldiers? How do we make soldiers out of citizens? They have to really believe in the regime. They have to believe that it's something good. Or they also have to kind of see that it's like a part of themselves. Well, in Book 3 of the Republic, then, Plato says that it's going to be necessary to tell the guardians this lie, this noble lie. So the noble lie goes like this, has two parts to it in the Republic. He says that the guardians are going to be told that they were made by the gods, but that they were made by the gods from the very ground of their city. So it's kind of, the idea is like they essentially spring from the ground, right? So like if the guardians were Athenians, for instance, that means that they literally grew out of the ground in Athens. And that's the myth, that's the noble lie, and that they're essentially going to be brainwashed into believing this. Mind you that I fully believe that Plato is really saying this tongue-in-cheek. You can't just take everything that happens in the Republic at face value. To me, it's ultimately just drawing attention that there's this conflict. But anyway, so the point is they're going to be taught this. And why would they be taught that? Why would that be a noble lie? Why would that be useful? Well, obviously, because they would then see the city as a part of themselves. Love of ourselves is very natural. We want to preserve our life, where we typically look after ourselves. On the contrary, it's difficult to try to get people to look outside of themselves, right? So this lie, this noble lie, is meant to. It's done for the health of the city, for the city to be maintained and protected. And the second lie is this. The idea is that in this regime, you're going to have everybody do what they're best at. So you have the ruling class, you have the warrior, soldier class, and then you have the laborers or artisans, okay, that are going to be doing everything else. And Plato says that the rulers are ultimately going to figure out how to separate people based on how skilled they are. Like they're supposed to kind of pay attention to their nature when they're kids. But the noble lie is that they're going to tell the kids, presumably, that when they were made by the gods, that they were given certain metals in their blood. So the ruling class have gold in their blood, and the warriors have silver in their blood, or I guess in their tissue. I can't remember, but anyway, in their body, and the laborers have bronze in their body or their blood, right? How do these people know that? Well, I don't know. That's the point. It's this lie, right? But what they're really doing in practice is they're actually putting everybody in place according to their ability, right? Which ideally, again, this is he's just drawing attention to this particular problem. So why? What's the point of telling them this lie then? Like, why is it the case that this is helpful? And in my opinion, that's because the first lie is going to protect the city from foreign threat, because the warriors are going to know what to do, that they're going to fight for their country because it's their country, right? The fatherland, the motherland, this idea, right? But what about the other lie? Well, the other lie is to protect the country from within. Right? Because if everybody knows their place, like, they'll probably won't question as much, like, oh, I bet the city could be run in a better way. Oh, just kidding. I'm a laborer. I forgot to have bronze in my veins. So that's not really for me to decide. So anyway, it's kind of fascinating. this noble lie then. All right, so I want you to see how that relates to what we're going to see here in The Dark Knight. So let's actually watch the clip. And as you watch it, try to see what the connection is.
Dad? Dad, is he okay?
Thank you.
You don't have to thank me.
Yes, I do. The Joker won. Harvey's prosecution, everything you fought for. Undone. Whatever chance you gave us of fixing our city dies with Harvey's reputation. We bet it all on him. The Joker took the best of us and tore him down. People will lose hope.
They won't. They must never know what he did.
5 dead. 2 of them cops. You can't speak that.
But the Joker cannot win. Gotham needs its true hero. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. I can do those things, because I'm not a hero. Not like Dad. I killed those people. That's what I can be.
No, you can't. You're not.
I'm whatever Gotham needs me to be. Call it in.
A hero. Not the hero we deserved, but the hero we needed. Nothing less than a knight. Shining. I'll hunt you.
You'll hunt me. You'll condemn me. Set the dogs on me. Because that's what needs to happen. Because sometimes truth isn't good enough. Sometimes people deserve more. Sometimes people deserve to have their faith rewarded.
Batman! Batman! Why is he running, Dad?
Because we have to chase him.
Okay, we're going in! Go, go! Move!
He didn't do anything wrong.
Because he's the hero Gotham deserves. But not the one it needs right now. So we'll hunt him. Because he can take it. Because he's not our hero. He's a silent guardian. A watchful protector. A dark knight.
Okay, so I find that fascinating. That you do, that's exactly an example of a noble lie, right? So for me, in The Dark Knight, I see the Joker as representing actually the Thrasymachus point of view, really the postmodern point of view, that there is no truth, right? That there's no truth, and you know what? Let's just have chaos then, right? Let's just have our own way. And of course, the Joker is trying to get some kind of a relish by seeing everybody else fail, in their adherence to principle and their belief that there is objective truth in the world and that we can live according to it, right? So what does Batman think then? It's like he doesn't really trust the people to handle the truth, though. He thinks that if the truth is presented to them unvarnished, that they would actually kind of lose faith, and that the Joker would win. That the Joker would win. Oh man, Harvey Dent didn't really believe all those things, so then we're going to take this Thrasymachus idea that it's all corrupt, and take the cynical view that maybe there is no such thing as true justice or something like this, right? But the Joker can't win, so we can't just present the truth about things unvarnished. And that is absolutely true in political philosophy as well. Like the statesman can't just go in to a regime and just knock everything down and establish what's correct. Sometimes the truth is hard, right? And it's hard to just make a quick transition. I like to think of the regime as a house, as a big house. And could the house be better or worse? Well, sure. It could be kind of rickety, or it could be more stable. It could have beautiful, doors and walls and everything else. The rooms nice and comfortable and everything else, right? You could have a better house, or you could have a worse house, right? But sometimes in order to make the house better, you have to go in and poke around in the foundations. And what can happen if you're poking around like that? Well, the whole thing could come tumbling down, right? If you start to question what the regime holds as true, the opinions that they adhere to, if you start messing around with that, the whole society can lose faith in the regime. You can have chaos. And that's what the Joker's trying to do. He's an agent of chaos, right? He's trying to get the citizens of Gotham to lose faith in their city. Batman doesn't think that the people are ready for the truth, so he presents this lie. It's fascinating. Now, ultimately, I wouldn't condone it. I don't know. Perhaps there might be a situation where maybe you kind of play fast and loose with it a little bit. I don't know. Ultimately, I would say that there's always a way to do things right. And as a matter of fact, that's what you kind of see in The Dark Knight Rises, right? So whereas the theme in The Dark Knight is this idea of not losing faith, right? And not allowing the Joker to have his victory. In The Dark Knight Rises, the whole theme is it's time for truth to have its day. Doesn't Alfred say something like that, Master Bruce, maybe it's time for truth to have its day in the sun, or something like that, he says. But I think the whole point of it is to illustrate that conflict, that there is this conflict in the regime, the conflict of how do you make it better, but still how do you allow it to survive? It's hard, and that is the political art. That's the art of the statesman. That's why it's difficult to have a good statesman. And by the way, what's kind of interesting about that nature of political action, right? Political action, again, is conserving or changing something. Just by the very nature of political action, I don't know if you guys have considered this, but by the very nature of political action, you automatically have liberals and conservatives, actually. You have the liberal-minded people who are wanting to change things for the better, and conservative-minded people who are trying to conserve things that are good. So I guess the image that we should have of the statesman then, who is the statesman? The statesman is the expert at political philosophy, or the expert at the political art. And if the statement is truly involved in a political society, it's kind of like he's trying to steer the ship of state in the right direction. It's actually sometimes more appropriate to be liberal, and sometimes it's more appropriate to be conservative. It is true that there are kind of almost like temperamental tendencies that would tend to lead you one way or another. But I think what Plato and Aristotle would say, and what I would say too, if we think about it, we should consider this, that any kind of temperament that we should have, we should actually try to get beyond that. Sometimes the political climate is such that that there's too much that's bad that we need to change. We need to change for the good. Or sometimes we don't realize like how good we have it, and it's like, dude, don't touch it, because we're doing great. And as you can imagine, it's sometimes more complex than that you have both things going on, right? Like you can be conservative about some things and liberal about others. And by the way, the terms conservative and liberal are kind of all over the place at this point, that they become a little bit indistinguishable. I actually am of the opinion that the people who we typically call liberal today are actually more conservative, and vice versa. The reason I say that is because, we're going off on a tangent here, but let's write it. So I think a lot of what we see in American politics today, or the way our regime is today, is through a development that has occurred in the 20th century. Our regime has changed dramatically. Probably the biggest way that it has done so is in the way that the administrative state works, how we have all the different agencies, for instance. Because the reality is, with all of the agencies, both the executive power and the legislative power have changed quite a lot. They don't really operate the way that they did in the mid 1800s and below, or late 1800s and below. Was very different. You really still had the legislative and executive powers acting as the founders intended, and that was basically the American regime. But certainly from the earlier 20th century, and certainly with FDR, you have a huge shift in how our regime actually works. And that was really more of the change that change that occurred in the regime at that point would be from what we would call the Liberal Party, the liberal side of the divide. And now that form of government, though, has really continued for a long time, and in many respects, it's the liberals who are now in the position of trying to conserve that. And many conservatives are trying to go back to like the way the founders had it, like without the huge administrative state and some of these other things. So I don't know. I think there's something to that. We can quibble about, again, like what we really mean by conservative and liberal and so on. Anyway, the only point I'm trying to raise right now is that there is, just by the very nature of political things, you do tend to have these two parties, if you will. But again, the where we see political philosophy here is the fact that it's possible to go from, for the regime to get better and better and better. All right. Believe it or not, guys, if you're not super familiar with a lot of these political things, believe it or not, that is not the philosophical, that is not the philosophy of modernity and postmodernity. We've discussed this before, that with the analogy of the cave. This idea, so, speaking of the Republic, this also illustrates what political philosophy is about, right? Political philosophy believes that it is possible to get out of the cave. The puppeteers are showing us all of these images, right? In front of the fire, and we see the wall in the cave, and we see these images. that can be representative of our political opinions, right? And so the objective is that we're trying to get away from political opinions to political knowledge in true sunlight, to see things as they really are, as much as is possible for humans. So political philosophy believes that there is an outside to this cave, that there is sunlight outside, and that it's possible, even though very difficult, to take the chains off and to confront the puppeteers, if you will, and simply to acknowledge that they're there, right? To acknowledge that you have opinions in your cultural circle, right? In your time and place, and to try to dig a little bit deeper, and to go from opinion to knowledge. But in the modern view, as we discussed way back, the belief is that yes, there is an outside, but that it's not possible for just an individual to dig out of the cave. That the only way that you dig out of the cave is through a historical process, and that as time goes on, the regime becomes better and better, kind of automatically. It's almost like it's destined to happen. This is the idea of historicism, that there's a certain logic to history and that it's inevitable, right? We actually have this prejudice. I would call it a prejudice. We have this prejudice that the next generation is always better than the previous one. That as time goes on, we become better and better. Now, I think there's good reason to have this prejudice, is because it does work out that way in the natural philosophy side of things, right? With science, obviously with science and technology, that's a very easy thing that we can improve upon as time goes on. But the whole point is that this other side of reality, human interaction, how it is that we live, that one is very easy to get better and worse and better and worse and better and worse, right? My contention would be that there is no such thing as a nice historical process when it comes to politics, when it comes to how we live every day, right? Questions of right and wrong are not subject to science. They're something else, and that's not something that you just easily progress in. There is progress in certain areas and regress in other areas, and we could have big regresses and we could have big progress. So anyway, but again, the point is, in modern philosophy, then it's not something that we can just do at any given time period. You're not allowed to exit the cave. You're subject to whatever the ideas are of your time and place, right? And that is, in fact, the political science model that we have today. It's like we don't really question the values that we have as a society, or if we do, we do it in a different form. We don't really call it it's not really part of the political science arena. It's really something that is battled out, but there's no inherent reason to it. There's no inherent reason to it for determining one way of understanding right and wrong or another. Again, we're familiar with this idea that we can't really we can't really criticize another person's ideals of truth. Truth is in the eye of the beholder is the modern idea. But again, to distinguish modern and postmodern, with modern, even though we're still kind of subject to our particular value judgments, that there is an inherent progress. With postmodernism, there is no such thing. Like, there's no progress in postmodernism. It's just all convention. It's all kind of meaningless. And again, you can have an aggressive approach to that, like, okay, so you impose your will, or you can have a more friendly approach to it, like, oh, okay, well, let's kind of figure it out, see who can come to my circle, like who wants to live in this oh, who wants to live in this country, who wants to live in this country. We can kind of, now when it comes to it, we can duke it out, and there's no reason why one place is better than another. Violence is ultimately an option even for the friendly postmodern. But as much as possible, they're going to keep it friendly. And many of us, are not really even aware of these distinctions, and we just kind of imbibe whatever culture we have around us. Make no mistake, even in Plato's picture of the cave, it's difficult to get out of the cave, but it's possible to get out of the cave. It is very, very difficult to question what your society takes as paramount, right? Again, I mentioned earlier that I absolutely believe in equality and freedom, but I bet you some of us maybe mean very different things by that, right? And it can be very uncomfortable for me. Sometimes it can even be very dangerous to question some of the ideals of your society. And we're about to do that in the next few shows. It is dangerous. It is dangerous, and it is difficult, but it is possible. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit more what political philosophy is. Also, another thing to consider is that political philosophy isn't simply about just what's the best regime, but it's also devoted to the ultimate virtue of the human being. So the purpose of the political society, traditionally, going back to the Greeks again, is to lift the human being to his greatest potential, right? It's to attain happiness. It's to attain a perfect virtue, right? It's a high aim. It aims high. It aims at the highest. Now, and this is where I differ a little bit with Leo Strauss, actually. Leo Strauss sees the English Enlightenment, like with John Locke in particular, as problematic to political philosophy. He sees John Locke and Hobbes as what he calls the first wave of modernity. I particularly think, and some of my Straussian professors actually are kind of along these lines too, that Locke is actually more in line with the tradition of political philosophy, but that there is one huge change, and make no mistake about that. That for John Locke, what he's going to do in particular is he does lower the standard of political philosophy quite a bit, lowers the standard of what it's possible to do in a regime, right? So again, for the Greeks, they aim high. They aim at the perfect virtue of every human being. But what we have kind of seen with experience historically is that that's very hard to do, and it's a very ambitious goal, and typically would require a large amount of power on the part of the regime to implement that. So the brilliance, I think, of John Locke and also of the American experiment, that's what they called it, right? This experiment in politics, is that we are in fact going to lower the aim, lower the bar to something that's more feasible, right? That government is only going to worry about protecting the people, right? Protecting life, liberty, and property. That by doing that, the human being will be able to flourish on his own with other societies. What can be lost in translation, though, is some people might think that when John Locke lowers the standard of government, that he essentially is also lowering then the aim of every human being, right? It can be understood that all a human being is good for then is preserving his life and acquiring property, and that's it. That's like the city of pigs that's described in the Republic. Like Aristotle would be Aristotle and Plato would be aghast at what Locke is doing with this. But the point is this, though, that what Locke believes that he's doing is that he's lowering the aim of government, but he's not lowering the aim of the human being. Where for John Locke and for the American founders, where government is going to go down, then other associations, like other associations, have to step up, right? That we're giving the citizens the capacity to kind of do this on their own, right? To work on their families, to work on their communities, to go to church, to get together with neighbors and go to the library and learn good things and try to reach that Aristotelian virtue, if you will, right? To try to reach the highest potential of the human being, and not necessarily from the help of the state or anything like that. And again, the whole rationale for that is, the truism that we all know, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's difficult to, not difficult, it's dangerous and it's inappropriate. It's ultimately wrong to give the government so much power that that it becomes corrupt and dangerous. And of course, we have seen this happen. So, and I guess I'm kind of showing my hand a little bit for, like I mentioned, the episodes we're going to look at for equality and freedom, is that from the perspective of say, a political philosopher like John Locke, the goals of equality and freedom were never meant as ultimate goals. They were seen as good because they were seen as instrumental in trying to bring about a good life. Whereas in today's world, we kind of actually see those things as the good in themselves. That equality is a good in itself, or that freedom is a good in itself. I mean, think about it. Just a little bit of reflection should be able to awaken us from this dream, frankly. Why is freedom just a good in and of itself? We are so inclined to believe that. But I want us to consider that. I mean, freedom to do what? I mean, a murderer could be free to pursue his dream of murdering people, right? I don't know, a litterer. It could pursue his dream of trashing up a town. But then again, somebody who's in love with the good can use freedom to attain those ends, right? So anyway, that's kind of the idea. And this is, I think this is how we can see very clearly the key distinction then between political science and political philosophy. The key then is the idea of the good, that it's possible to pursue it, even if maybe ultimately it might elude our grasp, right? The whole point is that we can make our way outside of the cave to make things better and better and better, and that we're not simply stranded in history. That we're not just stranded to according to the whims of history or the vagaries of chance. That's the idea. All right, guys. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that interesting. I know it's a little bit theoretical, but to me, it's one of my favorite things to think about. So anyway, again, please let me know if you have any questions about this, like if you have any questions about what political philosophy is, or if there's anything that I maybe didn't explain very well. Please let me know. Let me know what questions you have about The Dark Knight or anything else, or some of the previous shows that we have done as well. So I'm excited for the new shows coming in the next few weeks. We'll have a little more time this summer to maybe do a few changes. So we've got some cool stuff coming up. So please follow us on Twitter. We're going to be sending out more messages on what we're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. So if you haven't joined us on Twitter, please join us. Facebook as well. Follow us. Ask us questions. And don't forget that truth is too precious to give up on. See you next time, guys.